Hey everybody, welcome back. It's episode 18 of Ineptus Astartes. I'm very happy to be talking to you again and really excited to talk to you about, so many things. Man, we are getting really close to Adepticon. I don't know how many of you are feeling the crunch like I am. We're at like 10 days as of the time I started recording this. Probably going to take me a couple days to finish. Oh well, got to get that grind on. I've got several listener questions that I want to address, and then for the end of the episode today, we're going to be talking about some of those last-minute additions that you can make to sort of spiff up your forces. Basically, I'm just thinking of stuff. If you're like me and you're looking at 1 month away from Adepticon and you're like, what else can I add to my force of Space Marines or otherwise that could make a nice little addition? Well, say no more, fam. We're going to talk about just that at the end of the episode. So let's get into it. Before I get into that, though, I want to briefly mention our sponsor. If you missed last episode, hobbyogre.com is sponsoring the podcast, and they have given us a code that you can use for discounts on the website. Go to hobbyogre.com and use the code Ineptus at checkout, and you get 10% off your order. Dave is running the show over there, and he's got a bunch of painting supplies. He's got weathering powders and stuff for basing. Some of which I actually got to use on my Malörtians. Hopefully I get on those this week because time is marching on. But feel free to check that out, support the channel that way, and support our sponsor for believing in Ineptus Astartes. Appreciate that. Also, the podcast has a Patreon, and the link for that will be in the comments below as well. You can join at either $1 a month or $5 if you wish. $5 participants are thanked at the end of the episode, which we appreciate because, it's really, really helpful for supporting the cost of the podcast, including subsidizing some of the purchases that we tried to make this last weekend for Legions Imperialis. So there's one more thing that I want to address, and that is a video that I talked about, and I said I was going to be filming on YouTube, and then I never did. And that was the last part of the video on demons and list composition. Now, I fully intended to go through, and specifically I was going to make up lists for different etheric dominions and explain how they can be played, bring in the special characters, all of that. Here's what happened. I started working on the script, and I even began to record it, and as I was doing so, I realized that, unfortunately, due to the extremely limited nature of the Demons PDF, that it was a terribly boring video, or it was going to be a terribly boring video. Now, there are ways that the etheric dominions can impact the way the game is played, and the special characters do add a variation to that, and some of them even can offer incentives to build a certain kind of list. But the problem is that there's such a limited number of options in the PDF, and then within those options for the units, there's almost no customization. So there's really not a lot of variables that can even exist to begin with. And because of that, right, a special character, which in a standard list for like Marines or, even Solorox or Mechanicum or whatever, something like that should be a force multiplier or should be something that provides an exponential growth or value in one way or another, where there's conversations about where this unit should exist and how it should work. Those just aren't conversations that you can have because the list isn't designed to work like that. The fact that demons in their basic form can't ally into things means that there isn't even a good conversation to have about including them in other lists. It's very, very boring. There is not a lot of way to include them. There's not a lot of choices even when you get in there. And basically I found that as I was making multiple 3,000-point drafts for demons, more or less what I needed was the same 1,500 points in every list and then a little bit of customization. It's terribly lame, right? So let me tell you what. To start with, if you bought 1 to 2 sovereigns and a herald, that is the only way you can have any sort of deep stripe shenanigans. That herald needs the maximum number of bodyguards that it can have so that you can keep the herald alive long enough to use the portal, which you're using to try to slingshot a sovereign into combat. You want at least 2 large squads of brutes because brutes are very point efficient and effective and good at clearing mid-level threats to large swarms. And then you need a lot of lesser demons to score. and try to screen from anything that's soft, right? You are going to bunch yourself up fairly much so in the middle of the board with all that stuff because you don't have a lot of mobility, right? And because you don't have hardly any shooting with which to interact with the board. You can get beasts if you want to. If you want to spend any points on the fast attack slot at all, you can, but I wouldn't. And then both of the heavy support options have big flaws and problems as well. You're probably going to bring a Lord of War because it's a good way for you to get points, but there's big problems with that as well, including whether or not you want to bring one of the special demon characters because you're going to lose your ability to do so if you bring a special character. You see what I'm getting at, right? It's not that the list is terrible. It's just that there's so little to do with it that anyone who enjoys doing much more than the most cursory amounts of list building, you're going to get bored super fast because there's really not much to think about. You don't have any choices. The things that are good are very obviously good, and the things that are bad are very obviously bad, and that's about it. That's about the end of it. As a matter of fact, there are essentially two characters in all of Horus Heresy that really make talking about demons interesting, and those characters are Lorgar and Erebus. Because they have the ability to bring units from the actual PDF and place them in your standard force organization chart, you can summon those and you can do some fun things with them. And they can charge out of that summoning, by the way. So that alone means that you can actually look at this list for those specific things. But I believe Erebus can only summon HQs and elites. Exalted or Ascended Lorgar can do anything he wants. But out of that, they're really lackluster. The Bound Demons list has 2 or 3 data entries in it, and they're worse entries than what exists otherwise. So that's the only way you can bring an allied detachment of demons. I thought for sure that they would eventually amend that and add a couple more things on there. Silly me, they haven't. So unfortunately, I think if you are a demon player and you're having a good time with them, it still would be a fun thing to play against, probably. But it's just not going to be that engaging. And for me, like I said, I couldn't think of a way to make it fun, so I just canceled it. So first off is a question that I've gotten a couple different times because I mentioned it a long time ago that it was something I was interested in. Legions Imperialis is something that I have wanted to cover, but I've not had the time to do it as much as I want to. Part of it is because I'm so busy on this Solar Auxilia project and work and family stuff, but part of it also that has been frustrating for me is the fact that it's not easy to get a hold of materials to build the army or even play the game. I'm not sure what it's like for you locally, but my local stores have been sold out of Legion Imperialis stuff. I've driven around, to the next town over and such forth. I can't find anything that's worth buying, hardly any product. And then we just had the release for The Great Slaughter, and the new release is there, and I was busy doing something with my kids, so I had to wait like 5 minutes. I got to the checkout at 12:08, 8 minutes after what was supposed to be the launch of the sale, and most of the stuff that I had wanted was already sold out. And it's a 2-week pre-order window, so not only do I not get it, but it's going to be 2 weeks before it would have been able to ship. I mean, it's frustrating. I am a little frustrated by it. In particular, I'm concerned because this game seems like a fun game and something that I really want to play and participate in. I was really excited to look into the campaign system that is coming out in this new book, and also to potentially play the full Titan version of the game. That sounds like a blast. It's really hard when I want to play and I can't because I don't have access to these rules unless, you go to some alternate source, which is not what you want to do when you're trying to support a new game. Also, the fact that for this release in particular, it has been sort of buggy from the very beginning. And it's hard to maintain the enthusiasm, especially when there's so many other really interesting games for Games Workshop and other places that maybe is more interesting for our time. But I don't know. We'll have to see going forward. I am still working on the Legions Imperialis version of the Malörtians, and I do hope to bring those models to Adepticon to see if maybe I can get a pickup game someplace. But I actually decided to back out of my event, not only because this would be the first time I get a chance to just wander on the Saturday of Adepticon as opposed to playing an event, which I think will be fun because I want to go see BattleTech. I want to see the vendor halls. I want to go explore a little. But also because I was having a hard time getting to even the lower point limit with the stuff that I had to even field an army. So, I don't know. Hoping this can turn around sometime real soon, because I would really love to see this game thrive. I'd really love to continue to meld it into, a larger Horus Heresy narrative. I'm really still optimistic. I just hope we can get these supply issues a little bit more strongly tightened down. The next question is one of those nice introspective questions that I like so much, and it basically has to do with the history of the podcast. The question is, now that this has been going on for a year and a half, do you have any takes from your previous episodes that you'd like to go back on, things that you'd like to change, or new observations that you'd like to adjust? And the specific question here was, how do you feel about line now? This is something that I've actually been thinking about, and it was actually going to be part of the bigger concept for the episode today, perhaps. But one of the first features that I did in the very beginning episodes of the podcast was to go over all of the units that have line natively, the troop choices specifically. Take a look at those units and to rate them, because, we knew line was going to probably be an important part of list building, because it is how things had to score. Now, that sort of, your mileage on that kind of varied. The initial missions in the book didn't actually require a ton of focus on scoring. Several of the missions you didn't score till the end of the game, so it was possible to eliminate your opponent's scoring troop choices and keep your 1 or 2, and then you sort of would win by default in some situations. That definitely changed with Siege of Chthoniya, which introduced progressive scoring, which really incentivized players to bring more scoring units so that you could be on those objectives as much as possible. Personally, myself, I actually liked that as a concept in the game, although I wish there would have been an adjustment as well, because some legions, in the way we had things split up, you needed to make changes to stuff that you built, pretty intense changes as far as the identity of a force would go, to get more scoring into your lists. Without going too much into it, it seemed like traders, for example, had a harder time fitting in scoring units into some of their lists when you really wanted to take some fancy stuff that was like, you had Rights of War where you got a lot of things moved into the troop spot, but they didn't get scoring, so you couldn't really enjoy it as much as you would have liked to otherwise. While other legions like the Imperial Fists just kind of get line all over the place all the time, and so they just never suffered in that whatsoever. Now, before I go any further into this topic, part of the reason why I'm just going to briefly notice this now is that I'm going to hold off on a full review of line, because sometime in the next couple of months, we are going to get the next campaign book. And when we look at the Beta Garment event from the Age of Darkness side, when we get the rules for Black Shields and other things, we are going to get new missions probably as well, and potentially those new missions might also change the way we look at scoring. So I went ahead and pulled up the Warhammer article, the Warhammer community article. This was posted on the 25th of January, so pretty recent stuff. The Battle for Beta Garmin, which is the campaign book, is going to have a new system called the Onslaught campaign system. And here's the direct quote. The Onslaught campaign system pits teams of players against each other in an effort to force a decisive battle and claim ultimate victory. This quick-fire string of connected games is a great way to play out a campaign over a weekend, with a maximum of 6 games taking place before the final climactic confrontation decides it all. Definitely am going to set something like this up over the summer. But regardless, you can also theme your Onslaught campaign after the events at the Garmin Cluster, which adds additional campaign stratagems for modifying your forces pregame and tasks loyalist forces with selling their lives as dearly as possible for more time to reinforce Terra. And then tracked by the chillingly named Mortification Index. I love Warhammer's way of describing things. This gives loyalists a greater chance of seizing strategic advantage as their casualties mount. So it doesn't explicitly say that there will be new missions associated with this new book, but if there are, we need to take a second and reconsider, and also, who doesn't like new missions? So we'll just have to wait and see. We're going to be adding Shattered Legions and also Black Shields, like I said, at this moment too, so there's going to be a lot of new stuff to talk about as far as line goes and whatever else. Now, that being said, I will say this. Before I get into it, I will tease my opinion in this specific way. So far, my opinion generally has changed in the fact that I do think you need to have line, but depending on your force, you have a lot more freedom to choose to use it or not. But I think including cheap line units is a great way to go. If you're going to be taxed, just bring them cheap, which is one of the reasons why I think simply adding, as much as I hate to say it for those of you who like to do something fancy, simply adding additional tactical squads to your general forces just so you can pull them out as needed is probably, in my opinion, the best way to go. They're still an all-around great choice as far as their ability to score, relatively cheap, and they're useful in a lot of different situations. I still like the spoiler squads as well, but not as much as tax. And then, of course, there's recon squads, which are useful in a lot of different ways and are in some ways more survivable, even though they have less wounds per 100 points than the tactical marines. So your mileage may vary, but again, we're going to wait to go through that full review once we see this new book. A book which I promise to be ready to purchase at 12:01 when it comes out so that I can actually get a copy. The next question is about the Horus Heresy novel series. And the question here is, now that the Horus Heresy novel series is done, do you think it's going to have an effect on the overall development or direction of the Warhammer game? And what do you think will happen next? Are the novels about Horus Heresy actually done? Or is this just going to become something else? So I'm going to answer that in 3 different ways. First off, what impact is it going to have direction on the game? I don't think it'll have, well, I don't want to say no impact, but the fact that our most recent push is Beta Garmin, which is definitely a rewind from where we were supposedly in the plotting. I mean, we just finished the siege. We're going back in time for that. I still think we're probably going to jump around a little bit as far as these campaigns go, and I think that's great. I think that's fine. I think we will still probably get new content, and it might be fairly agnostic as far as the official timeline of Horus Heresy goes. I would really love to see even source material that goes back to Istvan, because while, we definitely have been past that point, the legions involved in the Istvan tragedy, especially the Loyalists one, have had almost no real updates, no new models, for basically like forever. And so I would be totally fine with a specific Istvan campaign system. I think that would be really awesome. Now, if you had asked me 2 months ago if I thought that was possible, I would have said no. But I'll tell you what, the release of the Battle for Beta Garmin has actually made me more optimistic about getting another look at Istvan. And here's why. Up to this point, basically, Games Workshop had been focusing and funneling a lot of its efforts through 2 legions, the Imperial Fists and the Sons of Horus. Like, they're the default ones when we talk about Loyalist and Traitor, which is fine. It seems to happen in Warhammer a lot where they choose, like, the Focus Legion. It's almost always Ultramarines and 40k. You get the idea. Clearly, the Sons of Horus being, like, at the center of things makes sense considering it's the Horus Heresy. Imperial Fists, for me, less so, but there really isn't a single Loyalist Legion that's there, like, from the beginning to the end in dramatic numbers. So, like, it makes sense to just pick a point and just go with it. However, showing here with Beta Garmin that they're going to add something in where it does not specifically involve the Imperial Fists means that there's really no reason they just have to stick to these things at all, and then maybe they can go in an entirely different direction altogether. I would love a more fleshed out Thramis crusade. I know I've mentioned that before. But Thramis, Istvan, or just come up with any other minor footnote and really develop it. That would all be really cool to me. But again, I think the idea of this being Beta Garmin that we focus on, that's good news for the hobby because it means we can go back and forth. And so just because the Horus Heresy series has ended in the novels doesn't mean that the game has to wrap up, or just doesn't mean that we have to go to the siege. I think eventually we'll get there. We're definitely going to have source books on the siege, but I really hope we take some time to get there because the Siege of Terra, while the pinnacle of the setting, is not necessarily the most exciting part for all the people who play the game. As far as what comes next, I do not think we are done with Horus Heresy novel stories, at least 30th Millennia stories. I think it's pretty obvious at this point that we're going to go right into the scouring. It's mentioned at one point in one of the books. Somebody actually talks about a great scouring to retake the universe. Haha, tongue-in-cheek. So, I mean, I think it's more or less inevitable. Now, If you're unfamiliar with what is, I guess, the official lore, there are a lot of really interesting things that happen in the Scouring, and I think that will happen. But, like, I'll be honest, I'm not as enthusiastic about this as I am about some other potential possibilities. The novel series that I would want the most, and honestly, an official game that I would want even more than Horus Heresy, and I have mentioned this before, it should come as no surprise, I would really love an official re-exploration of the Badab War. If you're not familiar with it, the Badab War, it actually talks specifically about a group of chapters that kind of band together. They are known as the Maelstrom Orders because they are basically just set around the Maelstrom Zone, and their basic job is to contain all of the evil stuff that comes out of that zone. Eventually, the Astral Claws, which kind of lead that little conglomerate, they push to invade the Maelstrom Zone and clear it out, this mini Eye of Terror. And they're doing well until the High Lords of Terra and other political forces kind of yank their funding almost and just tell them to go back to guard duty. There's more to it, obviously, than this. There is, of course, corruption. Eventually, there's a fall to chaos. But there's a civil war that comes about because basically they attempt to declare themselves independent. And one of the things that I like best about it, other than the fact that Eveyrone is one of my favorite characters, is the fact that the bad guys of the story involve chapters like the Mantis Warriors, the Lamenters, and the Executioners, all which are actually very otherwise wholesome chapters, who basically, because simply of a debt of honor, get involved in doing something that they shouldn't, and they're tricked into being the bad guys. And then the heroes of that story, the supposed loyalists, are like the Minotaurs, the Red Scorpions, the Carcharodons, who are like good guys, I guess, but like they do horrible, horrible stuff, and the setting is very clear about that. So there's not a lot of like mustache twirling villainy. In fact, it's really like in the setting, kind of like the bureaucracy is the ultimate villain, and so like you get an actual view of how a fall like this could actually take place. It's very moving.
Oh yes, tragic backstory. The pathos, it drips.
I knew you were in here somewhere. What do you want now?
I do as I please, for I, Erebus, dark apostle, am master of schemes, plots,
Please skip it. Please.
What? Okay, I was just on the couch with the dog, man.
How did you get past me?
I mean, I've been known to get the drop on people.
Oh my God.
Well, you've finished the book by now,
Shut up, please. Shut up.
Ooh, little angsty, I guess.
Where did you get a fountain soda?
Oh yeah, frosted lemonade. Got a job at the mall food court.
You work at Chick-fil-A?
Absolutely I do. You know, when you're a galaxy-traveling megalomaniac, essentially the personification of evil, it's really difficult to find a company whose values align with your own. Besides, I don't like working on Sundays.
Oh, fuck.
Family-friendly podcast.
How on earth did you pass a background check?
Ned, I'm literally a space magician.
There is no way this ends well. You're going to end up binding a demon to one of those little tablet things, or you're going to stab your boss in the back when they catch you coming back late from a break or something.
I could never do that to Terry. I respect him too much.
Really?
Well, actually, maybe his name is Jerry? Larry. I don't know. You people all sound the same and pretty much look that way too.
Look, I'm going to be honest, I really do not care at all. Just stay away from the people who work at the Mexican place. They seem really nice.
I mean, I can't control whose blood ends up being the best for rituals, but I'll see what I can do.
All right. Okay, I actually need to get back to this. I'm really trying to get this episode out, and I also have just so much painting to do.
Oh, sure. Say no more. The ox are looking pretty good. Metallics are a bit flat, though. You gonna dry brush those? I could work on that while you're recording.
That would be very helpful. Yeah, I was gonna use the
store post.
Yeah.
Okay, got it.
That's it.
All right, later.
So where was I? Oh, okay. So yeah, Badab novels. I think I would really love that. I would love the game setting as well. but even if there was just novels, I think there is something really unique and interesting about that part in Warhammer lore. So, because of all the things I said before, right? I think that's really fun. But also, like, the prologue, trying to set up the prologue for this could be really fun as well, and offer for a new variety of things. So, at the start, the Wardens are, fighting all sorts of Xenos and Chaos Raiders. Chaos is fully chaos now, so, like, there's all sorts of potential for, like, interesting interactions there. Huron, eventually becomes jaded by the inaction or the bureaucracy, and eventually, I believe he becomes corrupted by, is it the Tiger Claws chapter? I think that's right. So they are actually another chapter which is actually somehow a descendant of the Astral Claws itself. So, which is kind of interesting to have a descendant chapter be a descendant chapter. They're from the 21st Cursed founding. But anyway, so, like, they're all but destroyed as well. And their chapter master goes back to Terra in order to, like, try to get them to release some of the chapter's gene seeds so they can try to rebuild the chapter. Somewhere along the way, that Tiger Claw's envoy disappears. And while they're waiting for someone to tell them, like, what it is, that what the ultimate result is, and that itself could be a cool plot point. Like, maybe there is some sort of shenanigans going on there. Maybe the Inquisition attacks and kills them for suspected heresy or something to that effect. But it's after this point, I believe, that Huron begins to stop allowing and tithing his own gene seed to the Mechanicus in order to try to rebuild the Tiger Claws. And that connection sort of is what, builds that foundation. And really, because by the Badab War, the Astral Claws are a huge chapter. They have thousands of Marines, way more than they should, way beyond the 1,000 Marine limit that's established by the Codex Astartes. It would then be really cool as well if the chaos element that eventually manipulates Huron comes from his attempted good deed of, like, trying to save the Tiger Claws. That's a way cooler motivation, honestly, to me. It has more weight to it, more stakes, it has a much better motivation to it to start with than the way that Horus just sort of falls because of, a knife in the side. So then having, like, a very charismatic character who shows up in the stories and, like, brings him into this, corrupts him, we could see that, and that character can not only talk to Huron's ego, but also talk a lot of sense about what is very clearly the, decay that is at the heart of the Imperium. What did you say?
Sounds like a cool guy.
For a freaking superhuman master of manipulation, you sure do mumble a lot. Grab that mic. Right there. The one that's right there. Should be right on the table. Yes.
I said he sounds like a cool guy, very charismatic, probably lots of fun, lots of friends, and very important. Handsome,
You are, if nothing else, admittedly, a great narrative device.
Oh, but I'm sorry, I didn't know we were talking about me.
Aren't we? Honestly, though, I would really appreciate a Badab series that would allow Huron to be a point of view character so that we can actually see something going on and happening with the guy. In the Horus Heresy, Loken was a great focal point for the start of the series, and a great counterbalance for how bad things were going to get. One of the real problems was how Horus was just so hard to...
Watch your six, buddy.
Yeah, I muted your mic. No, nobody needs to hear what you're saying right now. You calm down and I'll let you come back. Yeah, I muted it as soon as I said his name. I knew.
I would like the record to reflect that I had to walk across the basement from where I was painting your miniatures in order to be heard. I am sick of the indignity, and I shall be leaving. Although I might take Hazel for a quick walk first. Goodbye.
Okay, that was a little dramatic, but I guess I should thank him later for walking the dog. Back to it. What were we talking about? Oh, yeah, nerd books. So anyway, one of the issues that I have always had with the Horus Heresy novel series, and I totally understand why this happens, okay? Let's get a little nerdy here. In the basic framing of stories, you have certain functional parts, at least in Western storytelling. And the beginning of the story, we call it the exposition, which explains how things are when it starts. And in the start of the Horus Heresy novel series, this is the golden hour of humanity's empire. And part of the reason why it has to happen like this, or at least I'm sure why the writers wanted to establish this, is so that we have an excellent counterpoint, something to remember when we look at how bad everything ends up at the end of the series, which is fine. Andy Chambers, I think, once very strongly pointed to the fact that Paradise Lost is a big influence on the whole narrative structure of the Horus Heresy in general. So I don't like the fact that how at the start of things, because we need to have this high ideal of how things are, it really minimalizes, in my opinion, some of the grimdark, or glosses over the fact that this is already an authoritarian state. But in Badab, we're in 40K here, and things already suck, right? Like, it's very strongly established. You don't have to prove that. You shouldn't have to convince any of your readers of that in that regard anyway. Like, you don't have to feel bad about pushing for it. The narrative can start with a primary conflict in the novel series with Huron or other primary characters as, the main characters. And then the conflict doesn't have to necessarily be with, like, a villainous force or chaos. The enemy is society, right? And how there are problems, huge problems that create a monster like Huron the Corsair, right? And then, we can have the new Erebus. That's my new thing, new Erebus. So whoever plays that role, talking in Huron's ear and getting him to that point. I mean, like I said, we can have Xenos minor antagonists first. There's lots of options. I personally would really love to see a Loken-like character among the Lamenters, because that chapter has so much rich background. But yeah. So moving on, let's talk about the main point of the episode here. We are only 3 days away. Several of you are starting to feel the crunch. Maybe you've got a project that's already basically in the box and ready to go. Maybe you're finishing up something new. Maybe you're looking to add a little bit of spice. So what I've done today is come up with 5 concepts or ideas that I think would be beneficial for you to put into your lists, so that you could just to have on hand, or in case you wanted to add an extra dimension to whatever it is that you're putting on the table. Stuff that you can rotate in or out. What do they call it in like Magic the Gathering? Sideboard, right? What kind of lists are we talking about? So to set some groundwork, we're only going to be talking about Legion generic choices specifically. And we're sticking with legions and not necessarily addressing other sub-factions, because this is the thing that the most of you can use. If you are playing Mechanicum or Demons, Solarox or Militia, I'm sorry, we would have to do a more specific video for you. Because, well, quite honestly, it's a very different discussion for those lists. One of the benefits of the Space Marines is the fact that there is a wide variety of options to choose from, and that all those units do different things, are very useful in different ways, and you can mix and match a lot of them because of the breadth, the depth of the army list. These other armies don't necessarily have that in any stretch of the imagination, which is sad. Look back to the reference I put in for the demons earlier on in this episode, but you get the idea. For now, though, Space Marines are the main focus of the Horus Heresy, so let's talk about choices. So I'm going through with basically just 1, maybe 2 choice per force organization slot, and we're going to start with troops. I think the best thing to add, if you're just looking to add an additional scoring option at this point, is unoriginally probably just another tactical squad. Tactical squads are very cheap. They are an additional 100 points for 10 models. But you can expand them out, and they can take up almost 220, 230 points if you put a squad in, add upgrades to your sergeant, like a Power Fist and Artificer armor, add chain bayonets, and then a Rhino with like the standard Dozer Blade and Multi-Melta. Having an additional scoring unit that has a little bit of meat on it as far as 10 total wounds that has to be taken off the table, putting it into a transport that can move that unit around to contest board points, stand as a roadblock for other things. It's just a good thing to have. The other thing, too, is that especially as you are tweaking your list and moving things around, sometimes it's really useful to have small point units like this that you can then slot into your list if you suddenly find yourself with too few points to add another big, exciting new option, but not enough points to add something middle of the road, and you can tweak the tactical squad a little bit to take up more points or less points depending on what you have or what you need. Especially considering that depending on the missions you're going to see yourself playing at your events, especially for Adepticon, depending on what you signed up for, you might need more scoring, you might need less, and so having this as an option for you in these last couple weeks, it's just a good bit of padding to bring along with you. Honorable mention, I actually think, is the Assault Squad, because it does the same sort of thing, but it's a mobility, allowing it to jump over territory and screens and stuff like that. I think that's a fun option as well. Or honestly, even a Despoiler Squad, which is essentially the same setup. One of the cool things, too, is that if you are to prep, for example, a Despoiler Squad alongside your Tactical Squad, you can just get one Rhino, and, if you don't imagine you're going to have points to field both of them, then you've got options to choose from, which is excellent. The next choice I'm going to make is going to be a bit of a controversy. Well, not controversy. That's a little bit dramatic. It might not be what you expect. So we're going to move into the elites, and the standard choice here, the go-to in this edition, is add another Contemptor Dreadnought, right? At around 200 points, depending on your loadout kit, you can do a lot of things with the Contemptor. The standard loadout with the Melta-Cannon for the absolutely insanely underpriced Melta-Shots, the Erebus Melta-Cannon. Or you can go something a little bit more specific, go something that isn't broken, that's fine too. Just go with 2 fists. But we've talked endlessly on this podcast about how adding too many Contemptor Dreadnoughts is like the anti-fun choice. So what else can we offer? Unfortunately, I don't think that adding simply a squad of like Terminators is a great choice, because Terminators require so many more points to support them. If you're going to go with Cataphracti, they are heavy, so they won't be able to run, which almost requires them to have a transport. And now you're no longer looking at an additional unit to sideboard in, but like a piece or a unit that is essentially going to be a cornerstone of your list, and you're going to have to build around it. 200-point Terminator squad with a 220-point transport in a Land Raider is suddenly a sixth of your points, and like it wasn't even something you necessarily wanted that bad to begin with, so not really a good choice. I would suggest going in a slightly different direction. Now, again, going back to and really capitalizing off of the work you've already done here, if you have, or if you are going to make an additional Despoiler Squad or an additional Tactical Squad, then what you can do is get an additional 5 or 6 models of that mark, whichever you're going to do, and kit them out with special weapons. And now you have an option for a flexible additional Tactical Squad, Despoiler Squad, or a Veteran Squad. Now, veterans have a variety of upgrades, including Nemesis Bolters, which are really interesting for them because the Nemesis Bolter, if you're unfamiliar, it is a 72-inch range gun with the sniper rule, so you can target specifically which model in the unit you're shooting at. And it has rending, so on a 5 or a 6 when you're rolling to wound, it ignores all but invulnerable armor saves, and it causes pinning. So it's a great gun. Throwing that on a veteran who has Relentless, who then can move and shoot this heavy weapon, is fantastic, but it gets really expensive really fast. Veterans can add all sorts of power weapons for really cheap, and they have native weapon skill 5, which is quite excellent. They did lose scoring in this edition, but they have chosen warriors as a bit of a trade-off. So what I recommend is that if you've got the bits around and you have the bodies, you can just pick a couple of different war gear options, like a lightning claw here, a power axe here, power fists, whatever, depending on your legion. Go ahead and put that all together, and now you can substitute in 1 or 2 models in that 10 tactical squad, swap them out, and now you've got some special weapons in a squad that can hide in a rhino, move around the board, make nuisances of themselves, and you still have some ablative wounds with the rest of the veterans. Every one of those veterans is weapon skill 5 with 2 wounds, and although they are very squishy in the fact that they're still only a 3+ armor save and they have no invulnerable save, the weapon skill we've shown in close combat is a pretty effective deterrent or way to protect them. Now, people have been kind of bashing, including me, have been bashing on veterans for a long while. So why am I suggesting this? Well, the biggest thing is that this is a flexibility option. The veteran squad comes in at about 100 points base, and then you can add additional points. You're at 5 models to start, and then you can add on a couple of more. You can do the standard Rhino upgrade, etc. You can really put a very minimal amount of points into this unit, or you can dump a ton of them into this unit. Now, I think that's generally nice for when you are trying to play around on the fly with an army list, to have a unit that has such a variety of points that you can fit in with it and do different things. Now, I think that if you, for example, take a unit of about 5 to 10 veterans and you put in a couple of special weapons in here, depending on the size of the unit, you can do some interesting things with it. Now, I pointed out before that, and I think one of the most interesting things about the veteran unit is actually the Chosen Warrior special rule, which allows any unit or any model in the squad to take up a challenge. One of the things that this allows you to do is that a veteran squad, for cheaper points, can be a temporary holding point for a minor Death Star. So if your opponent is running like a command squad or running like just a squad of Terminators with an HQ, your cheaper veteran squad still will have ballistic skill, still will have weapon skill 5, still will potentially be pretty decently armed, and you can toss them into the mix with a better, much more numerically, as far as points cost, superior unit, and you can challenge every round, and one of your veterans can remove either the sergeant or the praetor or whatever from the combination, from the mix. As a matter of fact, like, if you want to be real strange about it, so let's say you've got a veteran squad of like 7 to 8 people, and you put in a couple of recon marine style nemesis bolters into the squad. So you run in the recon marine, or the nemesis bolters are going to be used to try to kill the sergeant of the opponent's Death Star. Now they can't dump their sergeant into the challenge and kill you entirely with the praetor. And then you can make the praetor sit there, kill everybody in the veteran squad one by one, or at least not quite as fast as they could beforehand, because, they probably have another bit of coterie or, the rest of the squad coming in with them. But it's an interesting way to sort of divvy that up and make that stop that from being just an absolute horrible, oppressive combat. The biggest benefit to this, for me, other than flexibility, is the variety that it's going to provide to your army, and also you're going to be the person who didn't bring just another Contemptor Dreadnought, because it's really, really awesome. I mean, we know the Contemptors are really good, but, do something original. Build a veteran squad. Plus, like I said, essentially, if you build it onto or off of the framework of, a tactical squad or a despoiler squad, or even both, then you're using some of the same models for a lot of different potential things. You're getting some visual variety in the unit itself, and it's a more interesting hobby experience altogether. Your mileage might vary, but for me, the fast attack option in this discussion is also, it's very easy choice. And the choice is going to be jet bikes with Volkite. Jet bikes with Volkite are very cheap. They come in minimum of 3 a squad, which is coincidentally than how many come in the box when you buy them. And for only 5 points extra on the model, you get those Volkite culverins with 5 shots apiece. You are chunking out a lot of chum then as you go at a 45-inch range on a model that can move over 12 per turn and isn't bound by terrain or anything else. Now, there are some people who would say consider the multi-melta on these, which the multi-melta is an effective weapon, and the jet bikes do have the ability to get close within the 12 inches that you need, because although the multi-melta is a 24-inch gun, really, for its maximum effect to destroy vehicles, you need it to be within 12. You can do that. However, the multi-melta is 4 times as expensive an upgrade as the Volkite Culverin, and the jet bikes are considerably less tough this edition than they were last edition. So you might get within 12 to destroy that vehicle. You might wreck that vehicle. Your bikes are probably going to die shortly after that. If all you want to do is make a trade, or if you really, really need the anti-tank, that is probably an option for you. But I think the Volkite's superior in almost every way. The Volkite has a ton of shots. The Volkite has Deflagrate, so especially against Militia or Solarogs or something like that, you're getting a lot of effect and impact out of the Deflagrate going off and off and off. Plus, the combination of movement and mobility with the range of the gun means that you can really, really play with and stay out of reaction range, pepper different squads with that Volkite. And honestly, if you really, really desperately need to, you can even charge a unit to tie it up if you so wish. One thing to note, which at first I thought, oh, that must be a mistake, but then I thought about it, and I think it probably was an intentional design choice. The bikes do not have crack grenades. So if you do take these bikes and, for example, run them into tanks, you are not going to get that automatic strength 6 hit, which is really useful for hulling out vehicles. Probably something that was done on purpose to prevent these guys from just being auto vehicle killers in melee, which is definitely not the design of the models, but sad for us who love these jet bikes. However, like I said, buying 3 or even buying 6 of them, buying 2 boxes and putting them together is a really effective unit. 6 of them puts out 30 Volkite shots. It's a very potent bit of anti-infantry. And quite honestly, even though the squad can go up to, I think 9 or 10, I don't really think you want to do that anyway, because that is so many bikes in one spot, and even though they can move around the board anywhere they want and ignore terrain, they still might have a hard time finding a place to land in cohesion, or at least in cohesion in a way that you want them to be positioned. I would say 6 is about as many of these as I would want to take. Heavy support is probably in one of the least easy places to talk about as far as this goes, because many of the rights of war that we use are either going to be heavily reliant on their heavy supports already, or are going to have their heavy support slot heavily restricted. So you probably aren't going to get a lot of an opportunity to expand in this area in a lot of situations. That being said, let's go with a don't and then a do. Please don't add just another heavy support squad to your army. It is very tempting. Heavy support squads are super point efficient because they are infantry and absorb so many individual shots. They cannot be destroyed nearly as easy as tanks. As infantry, they get to fully abuse the reaction system, which is, the biggest new addition to this Heresy 2.0, which is fun, but also creates a lot of problems potentially. So it's a big no-no, I think. Now, if you don't have one yet, if you don't have one on your list at all, and you're like, whoa, heavy support slots, I didn't know, you can have one. That's fine. That's a good idea. Heavy las cannon support squad or a culverin support squad, those are excellent units. Just don't bring 2, man. Don't bring 2. If you do want to add something, though, and you still want to be a little spicy, most of the vehicles in the heavy support squad, in the heavy support slot, I would say are okay. They suffer from a lot of the same problems, which is that vehicles themselves die really easily, but there are definitely some fun ones that you still can take. A lot of it comes down to individual flavor or fun, but none of these are necessarily oppressive. I will say that I absolutely love my Achilles Land Raider, even though it dies to a stray las cannon shot every time I play it. For my Iron Hands, I also really enjoy several of the Sakaran variants, which I think would just be fun, but they're not necessarily that great either. If you're looking for something that's a little bit tougher, though, you can take a Leviathan Dreadnought in multiples in the same Talon if you only have one slot, so you can put a lot of points into that Talon if you need to. And Leviathans, for my taste, are considerably better pointed for what they do than a Contemptor is. So I don't think you have to feel quite as bad about taking them as you would otherwise. Now, they are very expensive in points. With any sort of upgrades at all, they're going to end up being 300 points apiece. So it's not something you're just going to squeeze into a list. Heavy support, honestly, is not a great spot for doing that. Just adding a couple points here or there. But that is the option that I guess I would suggest. Lastly, we'll talk about the HQ slots. And for us here, this is really about the consoles that you can take. Now, what's interesting about them is that the consoles, many times some of them are just force multipliers. Some of them are just ways of opening up new ways of play. The ones I would really consider looking at, if you have the time and the resources, are definitely a chaplain, because the chaplain is going to be a way to add an extra bonus to your specific melee threat. If you're only going to bring one melee threat, for example, in your list, adding a chaplain to that really makes it extra spicy. If you are a legion in which librarians are lore appropriate, if you're going for lore appropriate, librarians can be really awesome additions as well. I really enjoy the Vigilator also because of their special shell shock gun, extra pinning, and rending on a 2+. Those are pretty great. And then finally, one of my favorites has always been the Forge Lord. The Forge Lord is basically just a better way of playing a melee version Centurion who has access to a slightly better invulnerable save because they can take a Cyber Familiar. And then you can bring Thalax as your elite choices, which are line, jump pack troops that are tougher than normal and also have pretty decent guns. So all of those would be excellent force multipliers.
Did someone say force multiplier?
Oh, good. You're back.
Are you recommending me as an addition for everyone's collection?
No, actually, so I was just covering generic editions for people going to Adepticon. Admittedly, I don't know. I probably would have liked to show stuff from lists other than just Space Marines, but I was trying to get the most people, help the most people out, and I didn't want to do anything Legion because that's too niche and it's not like generally applicable to all people. But honestly, you know, a special characters list, like a list of like the best special characters thematically and structurally that you could use to actually make interesting or creative options for your list building would not be a terrible idea. And to give credit where it is due, your character does have not only a lot of narrative implications, but also you open a lot of doors as far as how to compose an interesting list. So I guess take that as you will. You probably end up in a list like that if I was being asked about it.
Oh, you don't have to tell me. And it couldn't have happened at a better time. My popularity is growing and growing. I don't know if you know this, but I might be the most eligible bachelor in all of Horus Heresy and the 40k universe. The look on your face tells me you think I am perhaps joking.
You're very perceptive. I don't know what you're talking about, but I don't believe it.
I'm on the gram now, you see. That means Instagram.
I know what Instagram...
Anyway, Facebook, Instagram, even on the TikTok, people cannot stop talking about how much they desire me romantically.
Oh my god, that's not what that means.
I know you're trying to keep this professional and all, but you see...
No, it's really... That is not...
Everyone wants to fuck me.
Hey, I'm cutting the recording. It really doesn't mean
this
that.
Post,
That's not
they
what
keep
it
saying
means.
it.
You're going to be
Erebus.
really embarrassed if
There's
you
an
stop
entire
saying
subreddit
that.
called
Stop.
Erebus. A bunch of thirsty dogs in
This
there.
is the last time I'm going to say something.
Just search for it. You can search for it anywhere.
Stop.
All right, relax. I'll stop. Ooh, last thought. Did Dave ever awaken the hobby ogre?
So, yeah, after I got him calmed down a little bit, once Erebus realized that it wasn't, that people didn't want to, well, you know, he actually, when he found out it was just that everybody hated him for whatever reason, that made him, he felt even better about that. So all's well that ends well, I guess. So anyway, I'm really under the gun here. I've got to wrap it up, and I just want to say thank you again for listening and your support. I've got to, of course, thank our Patreon members, Lone Monkey, Dark Apostle Ben, the Uptown Garage in Ankeny, and of course, hey, our newest supporter, but also sponsor and Patreon subscriber, Dave from Hobby Ogre. So very much thank you for you people and everybody else for making this happen. If you haven't already, please feel free to like and subscribe, and hope to talk to you much sooner this time, and maybe even see you in a couple days at Adepticon. Thanks a lot. Take care.